Hola amigos, this is Level 12, and today we are back with our 9th installment of World War I Hetalia Edition. Today's episode is called Germany's Last Gamble, and we will discuss Germany's last major move in World War I and why it ultimately failed. Just before we begin, I'm sorry if things in this video seem vague or rushed. A lot happened in a short span of time in this chapter, and I'm trying to make it as linear and coherent as possible. So, just to contextualize the year of 1918, we need to understand the events leading up to it. Germany actually had two amazing things happen for it going into 1918. First, Russia surrendered and ultimately gave up a lot of territory in the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, I'll put it on screen, signed in March of 1918, and Romania surrendered in December of 1917, and it also got land in the Treaty of Bucharest. Both these treaties gave Germany territory in their terms, something Germany wasn't originally after. This sudden gain in territory was actually unexpected and partially unwanted by the German people because they believed they were fighting a defensive war, meaning they weren't expecting to gain much, necessarily, from this war. These new territories also had their own problems with distribution amongst Germany and Austria-Hungary and the polyglot of ethnicities within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Other issues in 1917 include the German people actually going on strike, much like we talked about in the last chapter, and these strikes would pretty much continue through the rest of the war. Also, the Navy mutinied in 1917. There was just no other better place to put that, but overall, going into 1918, Germany had pretty good standing. Another problem with the German people was they were losing faith in the Kaiser. To begin with, the Kaiser never was too heavily invested in the war. He was very ignorant to the full happenings and goings-ons of the war. Clearly, this made people angry and they lost faith in the Kaiser. The next best thing became the heroes of Tannenberg, Hindenburg, and Ludendorff. Ludendorff especially, he became a military dictator and pretty much everything short of holding the actual title of dictator. And with the Americans approaching, Ludendorff was anxious to do something on the Western Front. Because the Eastern Front was pretty much taken care of, Ludendorff moved most of the troops there to the Western Front in preparation for his big offensive, which was codenamed the Michael Offensive. He attacked the British on March 21st, 1918, using his stormtroopers and just a barrage of artillery. This wasn't the first time stormtroopers were used, by the way. This is just the first time I'm mentioning them. Their basic job was to just attack the enemy trenches while the enemy was still covered from the artillery bombardment. Oftentimes, they were equipped with grenades and flamethrowers and other things like that. Ludendorff would repeat these kinds of attacks 3 more times. I know the names of them, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. Each attack weaker than the last. See? While Ludendorff was gaining ground, it was unimportant, and he was bleeding men. As mentioned in other episodes, being on the offensive is costly. Not only were they bleeding men, Germany was running out of materials to supply the army. Germany had so little metal that towns were forced to melt their church bells into bullets. One town held a funeral for a 300-year-old bell they were forced to melt, and they loved this bell. Germany's allies weren't doing great either. Turkey especially was struggling with Britain's meddling in the Hejaz from last episode. In March of 1917, the British captured Baghdad, and also at one point they entered Jerusalem, I think in December, but that's unimportant. Which troubled Turkey. Germany sent over Falkenhayn with some German troops to try and contain this situation, but Falkenhayn and the Turks did not get along very well. Also, because Russia had lost a lot of land and was in the midst of a revolution, Enver, remember him, thought that it would be a great time to invade the Caucasus, especially Baku. Baku had oil. However, Germany and Turkey were arguing about attacking Baku for so long that the British invaded it first. Even after all this trouble, Ludendorff asked Turkey for more help, but Turkey just couldn't deliver. It lost so many men in quite a few different campaigns that the army was spent. Turkey yet again became the old man of Europe. Next were issues in Austria-Hungary. So Franz Joseph, the ruler of Austria, died in 1916, so his grandnephew, Karl, took over the throne. Now, Kaiser Karl did not really want to be Kaiser, nor did he want to be in this war. He dismissed the idiot Conrad, if you remember him, takes command of the army, and unsuccessfully tries to pull Austria-Hungary out of the war, though he secretly signs a treaty with France. He also tries to make Austria-Hungary a federal union, but that also doesn't work. The best he can do is sign another agreement to keep the empire together for another 2 years. Other issues within Austria-Hungary is that Austria can no longer keep up the Italian front. The army was quite literally starving. Same goes for the people of Hungary. This is because the blockade against Germany also impacted Austria-Hungary, which, combined with a bad growing season and not enough people to tend the fields, was a recipe for disaster. Any food Austria-Hungary could move around was difficult because of the strain on their weak transport system. Things got so bad that the Austrians hijacked a Romanian grain boat headed to Germany. Obviously, these are deplorable conditions. The people of Vienna started rioting, which led to riots in Germany. The Russian Revolution also didn't help the situation. Germany, more specifically Ludendorff, cracked down on this by sending rioters to the front, which was a bad idea, which also, to be quite honest, was not that many men, considering they were bleeding men in the West and had been twiddling their thumbs in the East. So while all this was still going on, the children of the Michael offenses are still taking place, so the Allies need to pick somewhere to protect and hold that. Overall, they decided to protect important transport areas, including a place called Amiens. A loss here would be really bad for the Allies, so the British and the Australians gave it their all in protecting it. The German soldiers, on the other hand, were ill-equipped and poorly trained. The minute they entered a deserted village, they began plundering weapons and food. They were in no condition to fight the Allies, and the Allies obviously won. Now, one of the big failures of Ludendorff's plans was that they didn't look at the big strategic picture. This is due, in part, that Ludendorff himself really looked at the bigger picture, but also he was hoping to force the Allies into a German peace, meaning they surrender, before the Americans arrived, because when the Americans arrived, that would be bad. See, both the civilians of Germany and Germany's allies were like, please negotiate peace, this war is terrible. And the Reichstag was actually considering peace negotiations, yet certain people, like Hindenburg and Ludendorff, would only negotiate on Germany's terms. This included gaining places in France and pretty much the entirety of Belgium. People that supported a German peace became known as the Fatherland Party, later to become part of the Nazi Party. All of this came to a head when the Americans landed in France. Now, to be fair, the Americans were very dumb and refused to go under British and French command, despite their fighting the war for 4 years at this point. So the Americans fought in 1918 like the British had fought in 1914. A lot of American waste happened in those final few months. Not to mention they were using guns and artillery completely new to them, so there was a learning curve there as well. However, that really wasn't the purpose of the American troops. They weren't there to be saviors, despite what my history textbook tried to tell me. It was their image. The American soldiers came in with bright eyes and ready to fight. They hadn't been in trenches for years, nor were they starving, nor had they been fighting for centimeters. The Americans were chipper, taller, and stronger. They gave the armies of Britain and France a much-needed morale boost. Germany's last offense was in July against the French, but the French were successful in pushing them back. I think fighting took place for a few more weeks before the armistice was eventually signed, but we'll get into that more in the final episode. So I just want to tie up some loose ends here. By the end of the war, Ludendorff was completely insane, to the point where psychiatrists were called in. Two of the strangest things he did was, 1, he kept the dead body of his stepson near his office, and 2, he joined a cult at some point. Next is the Kaiser, who abdicated from his throne around this time. The people weren't happy with him and was either leave or end up like his cousin Nicky. Kaiser Karl of Austria also eventually abdicated, and I think his son died in 2007. Finally, I don't know if I mentioned this in episode 1, but one of the reasons Conrad wanted to go to war so quickly was to impress a girl named Gina. When he did marry her, by the way, he got what he wanted. And that is it for this episode. I'm so excited that we're so near the end. I'm so ready to be done with this series. I have loved doing it, but it is kind of stressful. just a tad bit stressful, but I really enjoy it, and I hope you guys have been enjoying it as well. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more random fandom things. Ciao, chicos.